Today I'm going to quickly talk about the ending of Love, Death, and Robots Season 1 Episode 14, Zima Blue, based off of the short story with the same name written by Alistair Reynolds, which can be found in his book Zima Blue and Other Stories. Oh yeah, and before I continue, there will definitely be spoilers ahead. A reporter named Claire interviews the renowned artist known as Zima, as he explains the origin of his existence and the inspiration behind his final work of art, which will reveal the meaning behind the famous color Zima Blue. And for anyone curious as to what the color Zima Blue actually is, Love, Death, and Robots released the specifications on their Instagram. It's incredible how so many people say that they've repeatedly watched this episode, how everyone can connect with it on some level, creating their own interpretation of it, as Zima Blue brings up existential questions that every human being can relate to. During Claire's interview with Zima, we learned how he searched the cosmos for deeper meaning, trying to achieve fulfillment and happiness. Zima was a machine with high-tech parts that allowed him to explore the far reaches of space. The advancement of Zima's body is no doubt representative of human evolution. Zima started out as a simple cleaning robot with a single purpose, much like how our species originated from single-cell organisms, or a much more primitive mammal that eventually led to the species of human we are now. After his creator died, he was passed on to different owners who added their own modifications, much like how humans evolved throughout the passage of time, as a spot of light-sensitive proteins developed into the human eye, and how our brains that house a network of electrical signals and chemical reactions grew in their complexity as we became more aware and developed a better understanding of the world around us, helping us gain a higher state of consciousness. Much like how Zima describes his experience with his first owner, saying, "She continued to use the machine as a testbed for new hardware and software, and by stages it became more aware, all emerging from something so small, relatively insignificant, and simple." Zima is a machine, but undergoes a journey that makes his consciousness indistinguishable from the human condition. We are a species of cause and effect, living in a universe that falls under the law of cause and effect, meaning that for every effect, there will always be a definite cause. We grew and evolved by learning what to do and what not to do, like how causing friction by spinning a piece of dry wood into another can start a fire, and to stay away from snakes that rattle their tails because they'll probably kill you. With these instincts paired with our growing awareness, we became overwhelmed with the need to understand the rest of our environment, needing to know what caused everything. We started out as a species that did nothing but try to survive. We ate food and reproduced, and these were the fundamental things that would release dopamine in our brains. That was the only world we knew. But then we became curious. We want to know truth, and that is what Zima was ultimately in search of. There's wonderment in the cosmos and so much we have yet to understand. We look to the stars for answers in this vast, immeasurable universe which is relatively incomprehensible. In the absence of answers to our questions regarding things like purpose and meaning, we tend to conjure up our own, possibly substituting truth with different forms of religion, other practices of spirituality, and words like luck, fate, or destiny. The way Zima discovered truth reminds me of something said by Søren Kierkegaard, which is life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. Instead of relying on the cosmos for answers, the only way to understand true purpose and happiness must come from within. After venturing out into the far reaches of space, that deeper meaning Zima was searching for was found within his origin. Zima's last line is, "My search for truth is finished at last. I'm going home." And by the way, Claire's last name is Markham, which is an English name meaning homestead at a boundary. Everyone has their own interpretation of the word home, but a lot of people associate home with their childhood. And Zima found truth by going back home and returning to his childhood state. To further explain, I feel like what makes us happy is ingrained within us at the start of our existence. I remember the last time I truly felt happiness and bliss was when I was 6 or 7 years old, riding my bike down a trail near my neighborhood at sunset, watching these warm orange beams of sunlight shimmer through the tree branches. The only thing that I was worried about was keeping up with the friends that I was biking with. I had so much more appreciation for the smaller details, because life back then was more passive, and any need of leaving my comfort zone was non-existent. Every adult issue that I could possibly think of was still on the horizon, and I didn't worry about deep existential questions. But now that I'm grown up, I'm worrying about things like taxes, student loans, my chipped tooth, rent, car payments. Oddly enough, quicksand hasn't been a factor yet, all while diagnosed with those fun things like severe anxiety and depression that are no doubt worsened by our modern day society. Oh yeah, and that really exciting thing where you have to face the fact that one day you're gonna die. So if I had the choice to go back to the days where my biggest concern was how fast I was pedaling that bike, yeah, I'd probably do it, because to me those simpler times scream home. All of my more recent adventures and accomplishments, no matter how big they are, don't compare to that feeling I had when when I was riding that bike. It takes a precise smell, sound, taste, or color to remind us of that very distant, faraway memory from our youth, a time where we were a completely different person. Because when you get older, your identity and perception of the world change so drastically. But those small fragments from your past always linger even if they become almost unidentifiable. As Zima mentions, sometimes it's difficult even for me to understand what I've become, and harder still to remember what I once was. Zima's art was simply his struggle to regain that childhood memory by clinging onto one particular thing. In his case, it was this very precise color blue that stuck with him his entire life. Something he must have initially thought was a sign for a grander purpose, as it became the only thing that filled his massive murals. But the color just ended up being the very first thing he's ever seen. Kind of like how I use a particular shade of orange in my art. Using that specific color for my channel art, logos, titles, graphics, and anything else that I use in my videos, without even realizing that it can all be traced back to those sunsets from my youth. Zima's transformation is almost mirroring Friedrich Nietzsche's idea of three spiritual metamorphoses from his book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. By the way, if you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend you do, because I'm just gonna summarize it on the most basic level. Nietzsche describes how to become a free spirit, to help create Übermensch, that can be translated into Overman or Superman. The stages in this metamorphosis are camel to lion to child. To summarize this metaphor, an individual starts out as the spirit, a stage that represents the earlier parts of life, when the human is more passive and still afraid of taking risks. The spirit simply moves through life with no purpose. Then the spirit undergoes the first transformation, becoming the spirit of the camel, venturing out to find truth as the camel is no longer satisfied with a passive existence, and is now ready for discomfort and an escape from a safe, boring life. Yet the camel still carries the burdens of the pre-established rules and responsibilities it has been raised with. For example, the older you get, the more complex life becomes. We have to go to college, get a job, and face awful things like mortality. The rules placed on the camel are like how society, governments, and religions tell us what is right and what is wrong, as they give us an outline for how to live our lives. The camel proudly takes on the burdens and responsibilities of others, unaware that it becomes a prisoner to these ideologies. Zima experiences a more obvious form of imprisonment, as he took on the burdens of his new owners after he was passed on by his creator. With each new owner, Zima was given new rules, values, and purpose. Once the camel enters the loneliest desert and discovers that life may be void of meaning and there is no universal truth, and the pre-established rules it followed were the camel's own form of imprisonment, the camel then seeks freedom, causing the transformation into the spirit of the lion, the stage where the lion rejects all of its teachings, now destroying what the world has built inside of it, saying no to the dragon, which is a representation of all those burdens, morals, and values placed on the camel. Much like how Zima was so focused on serving humans to the point where he was painting human portraiture, but denies the world he was raised in, needing to separate himself to find his own understanding of everything. After the lion takes on the dragon, the lion then becomes the child. From the destruction we can now create, no longer seeking answers or deeper meaning from the universe, the child takes the emptiness the lion has discovered and begins to create its own meaning, as it enters this stage of innocence and forgetfulness, only wanting to return to a life of joy and fulfillment. Zima enters this stage finally liberating himself by creating his own reality and a new beginning. By reverting back to his most primitive or childlike state, it was the death of his higher consciousness and his return back to what he thought was the best version of himself. This state is equivalent to a human being going back to the days where he just needed to forage for food and make fires to keep warm. The same kind of simplicity that was needed to make 6 or 7-year-old me happy and content. Zima appreciates the smaller, insignificant parts of the world and views them as something just as beautiful as the cosmos. Zima completes this metamorphosis and transforms into the spirit of the child. Thus, he achieves happiness. This episode helps reinforce the fact that your place in the universe is whatever you want it to be. Life is meaningless, but we're the only ones that can give it meaning, because meaning is completely subjective. We are constantly taking on new burdens, making our lives more convoluted by the day, taking us further away from the simplicity, and making it harder to determine what makes us happy. Zima was universally famous as he created the most grand pieces of art, became practically immortal in order to explore the cosmos, but only found happiness and fulfillment from cleaning those Zima blue tiles in the pool, showing us that the most complex questions in life can have the most simple answers. And that's all I had to say about Zima Blue. This is just the way that I interpreted this episode. There are an endless amount of interpretations out there, and I would love to hear about yours in the comments. A quick message to my subscribers: don't worry, I'm still working on more Black Mirror analysis. I was just really wanting to start analyzing Love, Death, and Robots so I can start making videos on both shows. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next Love, Death, and Robots Ending Explained.